balance of power, a leader could become a dictator, and under a dictatorship, bring everything under his single power and his arm of control, and your freedoms would be completely lost. In a letter dated May 23rd, 1857, Lord Macaulay wrote a letter to H.S. Randall, Esquire, in which Macaulay made this amazing prediction of America's future troubles. I'm going to read it to you. Your republic will be pillaged and ravaged in the 20th century, just as the Roman Empire was by the barbarians of the 5th century, with the difference that the devastation of the Roman Empire came from abroad, and your barbarians will be the people of your own country and the product of your own institutions. C. Osborne Ward, who once served as a translator and a librarian of the U.S. Department of Labor, published a book in 1888 titled The Ancient Lowly, A History of the Ancient Working People. The book traced labor unions among the working people, and it called back to ancient times preceding the Roman Empire. In other words, he looked into the idea of what was before Rome. Now, he talked about Rome, and I'm going to give you a quote from the book, 1888, quote, Rome was gutted by millionaires and perished of her own infections, and her conquered colonies in every case went down to the bad, while the Amanus, or organized industry, once aglow with an ascendant genius verging toward a period of rich inventions, lost hope. Secrets of the manly arts sank to rise no more. Now, here is what is concerning, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you this and give you this list to help you understand what can happen in a major empire or a major nation, which has happened in the past. This is what happens when economies collapse. This is what happens when hyperinflation comes. This is what happens when banks become involved and call in loans that people cannot pay. Let me just give you a little illustration. Think about it silently while I read this. Who am I? The nation was a democracy. The nation had spent billions during war before the man's election. Before being elected, he was a relatively unknown. Before his election, many did not know what he believed or stood for. He became famous for his charisma and his speeches. He wrote a best-selling book that was read across the country. Women would often scream, people cry, and some pass out when he spoke. Large crowds followed him, and people waited for hours just to get a picture of him or see him in public. The people of the country wanted major political changes. The country was at a time of economic crisis. He promised to restore the economy, bring jobs, and rebuild the infrastructure of the bridges and the roads. When elected, he was considered a Messiah and a Savior by some of the people who followed him. He was accused by some of having thugs in his background and in his life. It was the youth vote that actually got him into power. He made a famous speech in Berlin. Certain records about his past were hid from the public. People were bullied and harassed by his administration if they spoke against him. He was the man who promised to change his nation and change the world. Ladies and gentlemen, everything I have just read to you was a man named Adolf Hitler. The reason I never understood how he could kill 6 million Jews and a lot of people not speak up. So I asked a woman who knew Hitler personally. At 5 years of age, I've met 2 women. Hitler stopped his car. I met this woman. Oh, God, help me to say this. I was preaching at Jensen Franklin's church in California. A little lady in a wheelchair. She happened to be a partner of our ministry. I'd never met her. I had a partners meeting downstairs. Found out that she was Jewish. Found out that she was in Germany at the rise of Hitler. And she sat there and she said, let me tell you what happened to me. Hitler came to Berlin. We went 5 hours early. Women would pass out. People would scream. When he spoke, he mesmerized people. But he stopped that car with hundreds of thousands of people there. He got out of that car and walked toward my family, looked at me, put his hands on my head and said, what a beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan girl, turned around and walked off and got back in his car. And she said, I was Jewish. And he put a curse on me. She said, it took me 40 years to get the curse off of me when Adolf Hitler laid his hands on my head. And I met another woman that on the back of a train, a famous picture is made where he's picking up a little girl. And I met that woman in Florida. And I said, I want to ask you a question. How did Adolf Hitler end up? She says, you've got to understand, Germany at that time was in economic chaos. The Allies who had won the war were demanding war reparations from Germany. Our economy went into hyperinflation. The German mark was worth toilet paper. It took you a wheelbarrow full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. And Hitler blamed it all on bankers who were Jewish. And we suffered so much before he came to power that when he was ready to annihilate the Jews, too many Germans were deceived into believing it was the fault of the Jewish bankers. Now listen, you that are watching this right now, I don't accept this. We don't blame Jews. We as Christians today don't blame Jewish people. We don't blame people for, come on, how many know politics are what's involved with this? But I'm giving you the reason that this German woman said that Hitler was able to do what he did with no protest. You've got to understand something. Economic crisis gives opportunity for strange people with strange ideas to be received and their ideas accepted. Who am I? I was born in Germany in 1818. I was baptized in order to keep my job. I enrolled in the law school at Bonn. I later transferred to another university at Berlin. I joined a young youth movement which produced a critical critique of Christianity. I moved into journalism to become an editor of a very influential German newspaper. After the government closed the paper, I moved to France and became a community organizer for workers. I developed friendships with liberals, radicals, and the socialist left, such as men named Friedrich Engels. I was expelled from Paris, moved to Brussels, where I studied materialism and its impact on history. At the time when I was organizing workers, I penned a manifesto in 1848. My goal was to overthrow a capitalistic society and to bring in a new form of a socialist society. And my main teaching was redistributing the wealth from the rich and giving it to the poor. This man eventually succeeded. Ladies and gentlemen, his name is Karl Marx. Please, if you're a truth lover, follow me very carefully with what I'm going to share with you. World history reveals that when there are economic vacuums, when there are crises that stir people up, it is easy for people to accept people that could actually be detrimental for them instead of helpful to them. For example, the crisis of France called the French Revolution led to the rise of Napoleon. Now, there were many good things about Napoleon, but nonetheless, he led France into continual war. The crisis in Russia, called the Bolshevik Revolution, and the czars, I won't go into history, led to the rise of Lenin and Stalin, who slaughtered literally millions of innocent people. The economic crisis in Germany led to the Third Reich and the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. The crisis in Cuba led to the rise of a dictator who's still living named Fidel Castro. The crisis in Venezuela led to a man by the name of Victor Chavez, who has taken over the television, taking over the internet, taking over everything, so that he has complete, total control of the nation. Now, I want to ask you a question, without me going into historical detail, because I love history. You know that. I love Jewish history and American history. What was it that all these individuals that we go back, all the way back to Nero, we can go to Nero, we can go to anybody that we have the past, let's say the prophetic empires. What was it that caused these individuals to rise that had a dictator spirit in their heart? Can I tell you, here is what happened. Number one, and this, folks, study your own history if you don't believe me. The dictators took the simple poor workers and turned them against the wealthier people in the nation. The dictator demanded the redistribution of wealth from the wealthy to the poor. The dictator seized the balance of power. A leader could become a dictator, and under a dictatorship, bring everything under his single power and his arm of control, and your freedoms would be completely